Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel that still doesn't have a name. I swear I was looking at this. Man, it's crazy what it does with the light. So today I'm drinking a very high quality champagne, which obviously they call it California champagne. Does anybody know what this is? Just right away, just looking at it. This is like $6. It's like you could get a Four Loko for like $3.50. $3.80, or you get this for like $6.20 with tax. It basically tastes the same. Like, this tastes like Four Loko to me. It's like, it has this like fancy label and stuff, but come on. It's not even that carbonated. I'm pretty sure can't you just do this? Yeah, you don't even, it's not like one of those like proper champagne bottles. It's like, it's not that much pressure. You could just, I hate this. Gold foil. I mean, I don't hate it. I just annoying. But then it's cool. You can re-close it to keep the pressure in. So it's got that going for it, which is cool. Let's pour this out and then get started. Get stiggity started. So by the way, this tastes like garbage. I'm running out of funds right now, and so I'm having to conserve my cash, and so I'm not gonna, if I'm gonna sip I was like, you know what, I'm kind of feeling celebratory, but I'm also feeling extremely stingy, so, I'll leave this out here, even though if it warms up, it's gonna taste like garbage. Look at that, there's some bubbles, this is not super bubbly. It tastes more like Four Loko than champagne, to me, but anyway, that's just my opinion. I don't know, I guess it's made with grapes. Crisp with notes of apple and citrus, huh? I mean, it's drinkable for sure, but it's just it doesn't taste like champagne, in my opinion. I give it like a 3 out of 10 because it's drinkable, but the only reason I'm buying it's because it's cheap and it's fizzy, and I wanted something fizzy and cold because it's hot outside. My last video, kind of went off the rails a little bit. I do feel like, in my not my close, but in my circle of friends and associates and people who know me, who do watch my videos, believe it or not. I took it a little too far. The funny thing is I actually recorded that video twice, and the first time was, I was reviewing it. I was like, oh, this is insane. You're an insane person. So I really dialed it back for the second time, but there's still moments where you're like, man, this guy, one, doesn't seem like he knows what he's talking about, and two, is just being a jerk. Why is he being a jerk? Well, because here's why. Because, what's that band, Incubus? Criticism hurts, but sometimes it's a good hurt. And it makes me feel like trying a little bit harder next time. It's just like people don't grow, as artists, they don't develop. They just reach a point where they get so diluted with their own perceived abilities that there's really no drive to actually push themselves farther. And that was really all I was trying to do, was to try to show, any artist who is, struggling maybe with themselves. And this artist was, she admitted that she's having a real tough time right now. Didn't say why, very vague, just like her poetry, very vague. But I would think that, it's because you're not you could submit poems like that, all day long. You could submit the kind of poetry that you write, and no publication's ever going to take it. You can publish it yourself on Amazon until the cows come home and try to market it and make money that way. But, it doesn't have any, so let's, oh man, I thought I poked a hole in my tweet. Cause I'm always I have a speaker down here, and I'm always pushing on it with my feet, which is stupid because there's an effing tweeter right there, and all it needs is for my toe to just push into it once, and I'm just gonna poke right through it because it's very delicate tweeter system, because it has a frame over it, but I took the frame off because I just like looking at the actual woofers. I find woofers attractive. I don't know why. Maybe they look like little areolas with nipples in them, like a little speed bag. Just look at that. That's one of my favorites. Would you just look at that, sir? I mean, sometimes you see something and you think to yourself, man, would you just look at just most people have no, like 99.9% of society has absolutely no idea what I just did. Unless you've seen that video and then you're like, that guy. It's the look at that guy. Anyway, yeah, I come across a little bit of a smarmy. Can I say douchebag? Is that okay? Will that get me demonetized? I don't even think I can monetize. I don't have. My videos get like 3 views, but it doesn't matter because I send them to the people that I want to send them to, and I just let them be on YouTube anyway. Because who cares? And that kind of comes back to my point, which is like, who cares? Like, the problem with a lot of poets, and I'm a poet, and I've worked with a lot of poets over the years, over the last since I was about 17, and now I'm in my early 30s. So I've been around poets a lot. I'll give my credentials a little bit. Yeah, poets are smarmy D-bags. They're they're very self-absorbed and they think everything they do is great, and or they hate everything. Like they're just like totally insane and like hate everything all the time, including themselves and their own writing. I'm sort of, as always, maintaining that I'm a little bit in the middle. I have a little bit of a self-hate, love-hate relationship with myself and my art, and I also feel like very much that my art is, on a higher level, but it's not just because I feel naturally gifted. It's because I have honed my craft, and that's the problem with a lot of these poets that actually don't study poetry. They don't. And I'm not saying like you have to like just be like who are those guys that like write Bible, like Gutenberg? Man, the camera's shaking like every time the camera's shaking. Because it's on a rickety scaffold right now. Yeah, some of these people, it's crazy to me, people that, they sort of just like I said in the last video, sort of just like wake up and are like, I think I'm going to be a poet. And like not just write like anything they write. It's like, that's amazing. Like I used to be that way. But what you realize is like, apply that to something else. Like, let's say like you wake up one morning, you're like, I'm going to be a welder today. And then you go to like spot weld something with an arc welder or whatever the heck. I'm not a welder, but it's an art. Like you can look at a bicycle frame that's been welded like cheaply, and then you can look at like a Trek or something, like a high-end Cannondale, and be like, wow, look at those welding marks. Like it's an art. And as you practice it and learn more, you develop the craft of your art. And, I've read Stephen King's on writing. He goes into it a lot about that. And, so I wanted to, instead of just like criticizing somebody, which is really kind of a dick move, as the monarch would say, I want to go in depth about what poetry means for me, what I've learned from taking numerous courses in it and workshops and open mic nights and just going to open mic night after open mic night and workshop after workshop and courses, like actual college level courses. I took Baker's poetry class at Moorpark Community College, and in addition to just advanced creative writing courses at the lower and upper division. And I'm wearing my CSUN shirt. Represent the Matadors. Actually don't have a BA. I have an associate's degree in English, and I'm technically a senior, but I kind of just like stopped going to college at a certain point. I kind of lost interest, but I got most of the way there. I took all the classes I wanted to take. Let me put you that way. I got 115 out of 120 units, but not all of those are upper division because I have 3 associate's degrees. So a lot of those are lower division for the AS degrees and the AA, but anyway, like I always try to take creative writing classes and poetry classes and workshops, and open mics are a lot of fun. Now that there's COVID, it's not happening so much. Lamplighter shut down and all that kind of stuff. So bummer, but still, all my experience has shown me that the personality of these poets, so I sound like from what's that? There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis. These people, the personalities of these poets is usually it's somewhere on the spectrum of 2 extremes. The one extreme is that they're completely delusional, and the way that they work around that delusion is that they try to get positive reinforcement. They put themselves in like a positive reinforcement echo chamber. An example would be, you've got 300 or 400 Facebook friends, and a lot of them think you're a really cool person. So you post some of your poetry and you're like, check out my new poem. It's great. It's from my third book. And it's like, and then obviously people that probably want to have sex with you, write things like, wow, that was neat. And like, who aren't poets. They're just like, wow, that was really cool. Cause it is, it's really cool. It's cool to log into Facebook and see like somebody's been creative and they've tried to bottle their thoughts down and condense their ideas into something, that's sort of like an elevated form of language. That's always neat. I enjoy it. Again, if you want to write a poem, don't get it twisted. If you want to just write some poetry, then by all means, like explore your inner creativity and don't let anybody tell you I mean, even if you're just fishing for compliments, like, hey, what do you think of my poem? And people who have never written a poem in their life are like, it's pretty cool, and who knows what they're really thinking, but who really cares? It's fun. It's fun. You know, but my argument that I was trying to make, and I probably didn't make it clearly enough as I probably could have, is just that don't write like a bunch of dumb, middle school level poems and then, was that UPS truck? There's a huge truck on that small street. Don't write a bunch of like middle school poems and then be like, hey, if you want to learn how to write poetry, let me know. I'm available. I can teach you. No, you can't. You need to be taught how to write a poem because it's one thing to, it's like somebody who just, it's like somebody who's never taught how to weld, how apprenticeships work, right? So if you want to learn how to be a welder, you're going to have to study under a welder. So it's arrogant and it's Dunning-Kruger effect in action when you say, well, I don't need to study anything. I just am naturally gifted and I can just do this thing. And that is an example of, first of all, it's an example when it comes to poetry, it's a clear cut example of Dunning-Kruger. And second of all, it's an example of a massive ego that is unaware of how massive it is. Kind of like a crazy person might be unaware of how crazy they are. And at the same time, there's the other extreme, because I told you there's two extremes. The other one is like this sort of self-hating, chaotic mind that is pretty self-aware, but at the same time just doesn't give an F. And both of those extremes are not good, because the one extreme that just doesn't care is not going to hone their craft because they don't care to develop a skill. And the other extreme, the person who thinks that because they love it and believe in themselves, that they are that good, that they are like at a very, very high level that's almost untoppable. Well, they're just deluding themselves, and that's also equally bad. I mean, they're both of these extremes are bad. What you want is to be very self-aware and in the middle, like me. Because I see it, because I've been surrounded in this world. Now, my own poetry is, I'm going to talk about what my thoughts on poetry from two perspectives. One is evaluating my poetry just as it exists by itself in its own little spherical void, whatever. Like the universe is like a giant spherical void, they say. Well, that's my poetry. It exists within this cosmic, spiritual, spherical void thing. And then also talking about it from the perspective of actual legitimate published poets. No, so like in today's day and age, anybody can just self-publish, right? So the barrier for entry has been lowered. It's the same with many different. It's the same. Like take fan fiction, for example. Take SoundCloud, hip hop, or other forms of music, but a lot of it's rap. I think somebody called it. There was some like subgenre of rap where like it was clever. I like the name of it, but it was like something hop that rhymed with ip. Rip hop. Rip hop is basically like you just rip other people's beats and just record over it, and then you're like, I'm a rapper, and that's a beat, but it's not your music, but you just stole a beat, and then you put yourself on it. So to try to prevent that from happening, a lot of these artists who create the beats will put like they'll put that in the background, so that if you do just rip at the beat, then there's still that watermark on it. But that's what I'm saying. Like you wouldn't have been able to do stuff like that 30 years ago, let's say 20 years ago even. I mean, 10 years ago even, it might not have been possible because it's just gotten so cheap to, like, a Zoom mic could have like 3 little microphones built into it, and depending on how you position it and the acoustics of the room, you might get an actual real solid recording off a microphone that costs under $200. And depending on, your computer setup, you might be able to mix that into like Logic Studio X or whatever and actually tinker around with it and create some pretty advanced and sophisticated production. That kind of stuff wouldn't have been possible, but the difference is, like, do you really know what you're doing, or are you just pushing buttons and twisting dials? And bringing that full circle to poetry, you can use this colorful, flowery language to try to clarify and enunciate the deep emotions that you feel in your soul, so that other people can interpret them. But if you don't fully grasp the concepts, it's like you ever see that movie Indian in the Cupboard? There's that one line, is like, you should not do magic you do not understand. And the thing about magic is, like, take a simple card trick. A simple card trick is going to be a lot of fun at a party. Or, you might do it like a street magician act and start doing some even more like advanced magic on the street as a street magician. Did I say street musician? Because same thing. But then, somebody like David Blaine will be like, oh, I mastered that when you were still, floating around in your dad's balls. Can I say dad's balls? Is that okay? That's a running gag, by the way. What can I say and what can I not say? You're just gonna have to get used to that. But anyway, at a certain point, the haters that are gonna come out aren't gonna be the people who you think they're gonna be. They're gonna be like higher level people will start to take notice of you, and you'll be put under that. You'll be held underneath that razor's edge, like a guillotine almost. Like, for example, you make a little art house indie film. You're not going to get all that much backlash because critics aren't going to see it. But if, for example, if your movie was big enough that the critics are like, well, this is what I get paid to do, I'm a critic, then they review your movie and they don't like it, or they woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day, and you get a scathing review that's like, it's like they're out for blood and they just want to they want to make you kill like what it was, Needle Drop, Anthony Fantano is pretty big. He's a pretty big deal at this point. I mean, he's not just, if you want to see somebody review an album and he reviewed it, he's coming up top of the list. And, there's like people who have like thought that some artists are actually affected by his reviews because they can be so scathing. Like his review, some people some conspiracy theorists, I don't believe it, point to the light, what's the one, like No Wasted Light or something, Inner Light thing, the Linkin Park album. I never listened to it, but partially because of Anthony Fantano. I watched his review and he was like, this is not good. Like he just blasted apart this album, and Chester Bennington like killed himself like a month later. People were like, that. And then there was some other, like, some 20-year-old rapper got a not good, and he like OD'd like the next month. So what I'm saying is, delusional artists live within this sort of positivity bubble because they surround themselves with people that reinforce their own opinions of themselves without offering constructive criticism or legitimate scathing criticism when needed. And so when somebody bursts their bubble, then they become despondent and frustrated and depressed and even possibly suicidal. It's known to happen. People go online and they read, well, let's say you came out with an album and you're really proud of it and it's big enough that it's being criticized, and some of the criticism is not going to be good, and you're going to get a lot of backlash from fans, and some of it's sometimes not even deserved. You get backlash from fans because they just want attention themselves. I've seen like Toy Story 3 had 500 positive reviews. And positive doesn't mean they, gave it a 10 out of 10. It just means they liked the movie, or maybe they loved it, or maybe they thought it was a classic. But in general, they trended in a positive trajectory with their thoughts. And then you got this one guy that's like, nah, it's horrible. And you read that review and you think to yourself, was this guy just trying to get attention? And so, of course, you're going to get negative criticism directed at you, and some of it's going to be deserved perhaps, and some of it won't be deserved because it's just the person's own, the person that the critic's ego is trying to get under your skin because they probably hate themselves because all they do is review things and they don't create any real content of their own that's like worthy of standing on its own merit. It's just, it's a reaction to something you created. And so and then maybe they're jealous. Maybe they're jealous that they don't have your skill and skill set and talent. So it's a very interesting relationship between what is, I really want to use this word ostensibly, but I don't know if I'm using it correctly because very rarely that one comes up. What is ostensibly a relationship that you have with somebody that is there to push you for your benefit, or possibly a more toxic relationship that's really just there to boost the ego of the other person because they're sort of a bully. And then again, those are the two extremes, and the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. Oh, that did not go down the right way. That did not go down the right way. I think I have to jumpstart my heart after that one. I'm trying to drink like quickly, but it's partially the taste. It really, this is not champagne. I don't know what this is, but it is drinkable. And I will say it is cheap. So with this, there it goes again. Look at that. You see look at that. That's cool. I wish it was a little colder. I left it in the freezer for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and it got it pretty chilled. In summary, I feel bad about some of the stuff I said yesterday about this particular person, and I want to not apologize, but clarify a little more my credentials. When I give you feedback, it's not just me being, who was it? Clint Eastwood, like being mean for meanness sake, or is that Gene Hackman in Unforgiven? It's not just me being a jerk to be a jerk. I'm trying to push you, like in that movie. What's that drummer movie? Not Drumline. I mean Drumline too a little bit, but that other drumming movie, with what's his face from the Spider-Man movies. Get me pictures of Spider-Man. Who's that actor? He's like a character actor. He plays like a really good. I'm not up on my names right now. I don't even try anymore. If I can't think of their name right off the bat, I just know because I'll just get all tensed up and then just freeze up. But yeah, that dude from Spider-Man. Get me pictures of Spider-Man. That guy's in that drummer movie, whatever it's called. Like that's how I see me a little bit, because I want you to be like, no, my writing is good, but in the back of your head you'd be like, but this guy does say that. Like, how could I show him up? How could I like not necessarily like I'm doing this to impress you. No, you're doing this for yourself. But what if I was impressed after giving you that criticism? It would show that you've actually grown and developed your skills. You're honing your craft, in other words. Yeah, nobody forged the freaking blade of Cthulhu, whatever, from Lord of the Rings, the blade that was broken. Like, it's not just anybody that could just melt those pieces back together and remake the Elendil sword from Return of the King. I love that scene. That it's just like that camera shot, like goes. The sword just keeps going up and up and up. Such a cool moment. I don't know. Is that moment in the books? I think somebody told me once that moment's not in the books. I was like, well, it should have been, because that was a cool moment in the movie. Return of the King, by the way, my least favorite of the three. For a number of reasons. I might get into it at some point. But anyway, getting back on track. I'm trying to explain that my critiques when it comes to you are not because I'm trying to be mean or a bully, but in fact because I really want you to do better. I feel like you're lethargic, you have writer's block, you're trying to push through your writer's block, but you're not focusing on your craft the way you should, which is you should really just start diving into other people's work. And normally, like, let's say I like to practice hip hop. Hip hop is all separate from my poetry. I'm not crazy about listening to hip hop. Ozzy Osbourne is not crazy about listening to heavy metal music because he said in an interview that he thought that some of those ideas would come across in his music, and he didn't want to be influenced by it because he wanted to maintain his originality. Because Ozzy is so like confident in himself that he wants to just keep that OG, but he also knows that he'll retain information that he'll end up channeling somebody else through him, and he doesn't want that. It's really interesting. So an argument could be made for, well, I don't want to read books on poetry or books written by poets, other poets, because then their content might like come across to me. So again, moderation, like perhaps don't read a different book of poetry every day, but maybe just be very selective and pick a few. I've got a few books here. I don't have many. This one's a joke. This one's called the Limerick. It's like 1,700 limericks. I'm fascinated by it because that's just pure craft. Is looking at some of these limericks and figuring out, well, which ones are actually because none of them have like authors. So I'm like trying to figure out, well, which ones were written by people who actually understand the limerick and which ones were written by just idiots who were trying to be offensive. It's a lot of fun trying to like reverse engineer limericks. That it's like a hobby that I have is reverse engineering poetry that is anonymous, that has no like known author, to try to figure out if they knew what the heck they were talking about. This is a hardcover, a rare hardcover of Elements of Style, 4th edition. I have the paperback, but I literally like abused it so much and then I saw this hardcover and I was like, oh, that is just so gorgeous. I mean, just look at that. Sometimes you see a hardcover of Elements of Style by E.B. White. Yes, that E.B. White. And you just think, would you just look at that, man? Great book, very much. So if you're struggling with your writing, pick up a copy of Elements of Style and dive in, because you need to learn how to write before you can be a writer. If you think you can just be a writer because you just believe in yourself, that's like me saying like I could be like a baseball, like I could win the World Series and at baseball because I just believe in myself. Like that's not how it works. It doesn't work that way. And also people like me that actually study the craft day in, day out and hone our skills constantly, questioning, constantly developing, constantly trying to figure out a way to do something better, are just going to just wipe the floor with you, metaphorically speaking. No actual physical confrontation necessary, but we will wipe the floor with you because we focus on the layers of craft that are necessary to gain mastery over the subject. And don't get me wrong, there's always like that, like a Steven Tyler who like never took any vocal lessons, but he's like one of the most amazing singers, or Mozart, and like needed very little actual conditioning and training to be brilliant. I mean, there's always those like rare superhero type artists that are just like so freaking genius that it just boggles the mind. But to quote Barack Obama at a high school, there's like a high school, what do they call it? Like not a PTA meeting, but one of those like pep rallies. And he was giving a little bit of a speech to like some high school kids, and he was like, "You're probably not that great of a rapper. You're probably not going to be in the NBA." Like he's trying to tell these kids like, study, work hard at your education. And I know this might sound a little bit hypocritical coming from someone like me. I'm wearing a CSUN shirt, yet I don't have a diploma from them, and I'm in my 30s. I spent a lot of time in college, but I never quite got all the way. And I could blame lots of different factors for that. My own ambitions, for example, got in the way and interfered. But that notwithstanding, I've spent a lot of time around sort of beatnik poet types, and believe me, I can't stand them one bit. So if you're not crazy about other poets and you're a poet, believe me, like I'm in the same club as you. I hate these people in like, not all the time, but usually the feedback that they give me is not helpful. Whereas I have received my mother, for example, was an English teacher for many years, remedial English. I guess English is a second language type thing, but also considers herself a poet, and her poetry is hit or miss, but it tends to be decent and demonstrates a sophisticated level of craft for the most part. But some of her constructive criticism aimed at me, I really take it to heart, and it's hard for me to argue it. When somebody points something specific out about your poem, and you're like, man, I don't really have a rebuttal, then perhaps that's a sign that you could have done it differently and you could have done it better. Because really, at the end of the day, who are you writing for? Are you trying to reach an audience, or are you just doing it to amuse yourself? And of course, as always, the truth lies in between the two. I personally write to amuse myself, and I hope that my audience would receive it kindly. And so I'm right in the. I try to be as close to the middle as I can be. Sometimes I know the audience wouldn't be too receptive to a specific poem, but I don't care, and I just go for it anyway. So here's a book, Sound and Sense, great book that talks about a lot of like poetic devices, like metonymy and alliteration, personification, and metaphors, and all kinds of just like all the different kinds of imagery. There's like 5 different kinds of imagery. There's like a kind of, they have to do with the senses, like sensory imagery, like something that evokes a sound or you can see in your head, like by closing your eyes. It just like creates different kinds of imagery, feelings. And it talks about, there's just a bunch of different poems in here that sort of are like really good examples of certain kinds of devices that poets tend to use. And like I said in the last video, do you have to memorize all the devices and be conscious of them while you're writing? No. But should you at least be aware that they exist? Yes. Because it would be really helpful when you're writing to be able to draw upon layers of experience and understanding. It would make the end product better. I also wanted to clarify, because I was talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he was just an obsessive reviser. I don't think revision is necessary for poetry. I think that you can just write a poem, and aside from maybe just like moving a line down or a word or like a comma or something like that, tiny little changes like here and there, in general, like I think it's possible to just write a perfect poem just in like just a few minutes. I don't know, was it Emily Dickinson, who it was like one of those like 1800s poets was like, she said it was like writing a poem was like a train passing by. Like you just had to be there to see it happen, or if you didn't have the ability to capture it in that moment, it would be gone and you'd never see it again. It would just zoom past you. Emily Dickinson's an interesting character as well. We're talking about a poet who shared herself with just a few people, but was never published. But can you imagine like being a publisher and receiving Emily Dickinson's works and being like, wow, what is this garbage? Which just goes to show there's a lot of people that might look at your work and be like, well, this is trash. Like me. I kind of trashed this poet in my last video. And somebody else might, like a legitimate publisher might be like, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This is brilliant. But I would say not likely. And I would cite, for example, my own poetry, I could submit it. I could submit poems like for actual publication in legitimate journals, scholarly, all that stuff. Submit, get it published. And I do have a few that are in very, very small level. Like I have a few magazines and annuals that have some of my poems in them, but really, really minor stuff. I don't submit. I rarely submit. It's hard for me to justify it because it's so permanent, and I don't feel like my skill set. I don't really feel like I've developed my craft quite to the point that I want it to be, because it's just not. I don't feel like my voice is really shining through, and that was something that I wanted to tell this particular writer that I've sort of focused on, at least in my last video, was the spotlight was on her. I just don't hear a voice in that. I see a lot of triteness. I see a lot of vagities. I don't see like an overall theme that's really being fully fleshed out and explored. At the same time, when I look at my mother's poetry, it's almost the opposite. It's like rigmarole. That word rigmarole, just like it just like it starts out a certain way and then morphs into something completely different. So there's no consistency to it, and it feels like you're kind of just like going through this this convoluted mess and it becomes work. And and people have pointed that out about some of my works as well. I have one called Invagacity, which I really felt like was a flawless poem at a very high degree of craftsmanship was put into this, and numerous revisions and revisings. Is that revising? Can I say that? Like it's profane to use a term that I was in court the other day, which I won't get into, and the lawyer, not my lawyer, but he used a word, confusingness. He said, or it's like something like that, like just like that's not a word. Like I don't think it was confusingness, but complicatedness. Yeah, that's what it was. He said complicatedness, and I thought immediately was like, you mean complexity? Complicatedness. Freaking attorney passing the bar, and he's using words like complicatedness. That's not a word. Complexity is the word. My mom does always say, check it out. Complexity. Like, check it out. Complexity. Like, that's the word. So, but, you run into problems there too, because my mom and I have got into arguments about words that aren't necessarily words, but that still convey a meaning that is discernible. So who cares? I think Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's, or not One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's Ken Kesey. Through the Looking Glass and Jabberwocky, especially Jabberwocky. This is creating language, but it's like the words sort of capture what they mean in a way that makes you understand it, even though you've never seen that word before. And that's really clever. So when a poet does something like that, it's interesting to me. When a poet, here's let me talk a little bit about here's my Shel Silverstein, Falling Up, a classic. Now Silverstein, I'm going to say Silverstein, Weinstein, tomato. I think it's Shel Silverstein. Silverstein. It's like a Berenstain Bears moment I'm having. Has it spelled with an A or an E? A children's poem can also be an adult's poem. Rhyme is something interesting. One thing my mom likes to do is she likes to incorporate rhyme schemes into her poems, but then abandon them entirely. I don't fully agree with that mindset. I don't think it's a good idea to operate that way. I think you should not set out to have that be feasible when you're writing your poem. And I'm going to start to become a little bit of a dictator, and you can take my advice or you can leave it, but I'm going to be a little more authoritative now that I've established my credentials and say that being not adopting consistency standards in your given poem is a big mistake. Take conventions of punctuation, for example. I've read some interesting poems that have no punctuation. I mean, at the professional level, if you're so familiar with how punctuation works, especially in a modern poetry format, I'm not talking about like the Tiger or whatever. What's that guy who wrote the Tiger? Like those old school the poetry from like the late, what do they call that? Like in Britain, they have like eras of poetry. That old aubergine, whatever it's called, Victorian era aubergine poetry. Very, very standard, like going back to Shakespeare's era, like with the iambic pentameter and 10 syllables per line and all that stuff, and the couplets and the way that, like, those conventions, those aren't modern really anymore, because the problem is, like, you listen to hip hop, for example, and it's very complex rhythmically, and a poem. The problem with being complex rhythmically in a poem is it's very challenging because that sort of transitions it into more of a performance piece. So what I mean by that is, if you're trying to create complex rhythmical patterns within your poem, you have to be aware that the person reading it might not know how to break those patterns down, and so they're not going to interpret it the way that you would say it, because poetry is ultimately written. Otherwise, it's like slam poetry or whatever, and it's spoken word. But if you're going to be writing things down on the page, you should probably avoid trying to be like lyrical in the sense of rhyming things, because your reader's not going to really have that rhythm in their head that you had when you were writing it. And that's a lesson that I learned the hard way. Whereas you could, of course, write poems with that in mind, but just keep also in mind that needs to be coming out of your mouth for your audience to properly understand it, because what you're saying is, I've compromised my vision for the message for the sake of making something rhythmic. Case in point, you've got a poem that rhymes a certain way. Now somebody has to translate it. So when they translate it, how are they going to translate the rhyme? Not everybody reads English. So if your poetry is really profound and it needs a translation, that just adds another layer of complexity that in many cases is really not necessary. I don't really think that poetry needs to rhyme. I think that's kind of not the point. So, what's even, but if it does, it does. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But but if you're going to do it, you should stick to it. You should make it like the old school cats, and and be consistent with it. Don't be like, I'm going to rhyme this line with this line, but then I'm not going to rhyme anything else, because that's just really jarring for the reader, and makes it just adds to a sort of like kind of just an anxiety and a discomfort is how I feel when I read a poem that is like beat Nick, not like beat, but like slam poetry Nick-ish thing. And then all of a sudden it's more conversational prose, elevated prose thing, all in the same poem. Nah, doesn't work for me. I don't like it. I don't like excessive redundancies in poems, using the same like the poem I was reading the other day from this particular business, like usually always 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 always. It's like 9 lines in a row start with the same word, and it's so annoying because that's what I call the call to action. Not what I call, it's what's referred to as the call to action. At a certain point in a poem, there's going to be this call to action, like get up, rise up. But the problem with some of these poems that I'm reading is it seems like the whole thing is a call to action. And at that point, it just becomes like a rant, like a chaotic rant that in some sort of elevated language, and it doesn't really have a purpose or a theme or a, what do they call it, like an occasion. Like, what is this really about? It's trite, it's vague, it's not it's not imbued with its own meaning. Like a poem a great poem is about something very specific that is not necessarily easy to decipher, but remains sort of captured inside of those words nonetheless. And there's really just not much to unpack in some of the stuff that I've been reading from this particular artist, because there's not an understanding of the need to imbue these words with meaning. It's sort of like energizing them, like I hate to use comic book references, but like the Hulk being belted with gamma rays. The more gamma rays he received, the more strong he would become when he was the Hulk. If he didn't get as many gamma rays, he either would have died or he would be kind of like a half-ass Hulk. But he got so many gamma rays because there's so much meaning that was imbued in him through the force of this, chaotic event. How many? And I'm not saying that works on 3 levels. No. It's just I'll read a poem. Here's an example of, from Matthew Dickman, My Cosmy's Revolver. There are poems in here that the heck is this bookmark? It's pretty cool. Handmade soap. It's funny. I forgot about that. There are poems in here that I will read usually out loud, because I think good poems should always be read out loud, not just read on the page. Because you can read, if I want to just read something, I'll pick up a novel and I'll read the novel. But I think a poem should have not necessarily a rhyme scheme, but a sort of a rhythmic flow to it. I know, you take Matthew Dickman here, and he's such a show-off, but he's a poet's poet. He shows off in a way that only other poets would notice, who are themselves very knowledgeable and well studied on the craft of poetry. There's who's it, Maya Angelou? I've read some of her stuff too, and there's some other poets. I'm like I said, I'm bad with names, especially when I put myself on the spot. I have a hard time thinking of names, but you do have, but these lines are very even and consistent in the way that they read the lines. I would like to write Dear love, dear motherfucker, dear heart, dear space, I want to write. Dear space, I can't seem to live the way I should without loneliness, without passing out. Now, there's an example of some guy, he says dear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He says it like 6 times, but it doesn't feel like he's being redundant. How does he do that? Don't you wish you knew how to do that? Well, you should probably read poetry by somebody who is a freaking genius and fully understand what they're doing and learn the devices. You could take any one of these poems and you could really break it down, and you could write a paper just for your own amusement, let's say. Like, write a paper about all the different little devices they use. Like, oh, that's onomatopoeia. Why did you do that? That's personification, alliteration, and this is a type of imagery known as visual. Look, here's a type of irony known as what are the ironies? There's 3 types of ironies. See, I'm not an authority here. I'm not a college professor, but I'm saying, like, identify devices in poets' work and know what they are, and analyze and evaluate them very carefully, and study them closely, and get back to me, because you don't know what the tools that you have access to even are. You don't know what the tools are that are available to you, because you struggle with Dunning-Kruger and you think you know everything, but really you just don't. The only thing I know is that you don't know what you don't know, which is everything, certainly, and pretty much anything, mostly. And there's and I always like to use this example, like the greatest violin player that ever lived never picked up a violin. I think it was Crumb that said that. Because they ended up doing something else instead, but they would have been the world's greatest violin if they had picked it up, but they just never did. And you could be the world's greatest poet, but you'll never know it unless you study the craft, unless you study the art form closely and carefully, so that when you sit down and when you feel something very strongly and passionately in your soul, and you sit down, all those tools that you focused and fixated on back when you had, let's say, writer's block, you won't need to think about them anymore. They'll just be right there in front of you. They'll be in your mind. They'll be in your spirit, and they'll come out and in your work, help you to realize more efficiently, more effectively, the vision that captures how you actually feel in your soul, your spirit. Be it negative or positive or cynical or optimistic or trying to be funny. Don't try to be funny. Watch out for that. Try to avoid puns in poetry as well. There's a time and a place. That's why I write poetry, but I also write hip hop. And I have different personas that I adopt for these different art forms. And that works really well for me, because kind of like Stephen King has a pseudonym. Like he'll write a sort of more of a traditional type of novel, and then he'll just go bonkers. Good example would be his Desperation and the Regulators. The Regulators is like his Richard Bachman pseudonym, and it's just like bonkers. Oh man. And then Desperation's like, oh wow, this is a really engrossing novel. But Regulators is just like, what the heck am I reading? It's like American Psycho shit. And I think that's important. It's important to be able to sublease your own brain to the various kind of. That's why people have different YouTube channels. They're, look at Anthony. Well, again, to bring him full circle, because I'm almost 50 minutes in and I got to wrap this up. Anthony Fantano's got. Well, he used to have that one, This Is the Plan or whatever, where he would go completely off the wall, and then that got controversial. But now he's got Fantano, where he can just sort of like unload and be goofy. But then he's also got his Needle Drop channel, where he's very serious, and his critical analysis is very well thought out. And that's how you should be as an artist. You should take the time to create, let's say, maybe alter egos that are more free to say whatever they want to say than you necessarily are. And then you can sort of learn and grow from them. I'm not talking about be a schizo with voices in your head and, ooh, I hear voices and this person's not me. He's like, that's some cuckoo, crazy, cockadoodie nonsense stuff. I mean, unless you're me, in which case that's just how I am. But like, for example, this YouTube channel is just another expression of my different sort of personalities that that artistically represent my overall character in their own specific ways. We can get into that later. It's complicated. But you know, if you just feel like you're trapped in your own head and you can't think of anything to say, so you just say something and you go, well, that's what I said, so there it is. Try getting outside of your own ego a little. Like climb into a mind that's not necessarily yours, but is. But free yourself. Give yourself a different name. Say that's not the work of whatever your name is. It's the work of this new name, and that's going to be a person that's from, you know, Berlin, who was born in 1975, and their parents were murdered like Batman style in front of them when they were leaving the opera. Like just create a new person to write something instead of you writing something, and see what comes out of it. I mean, I have another book around here. I don't know where it is, but it's like 100 different poetry exercises just to challenge you. Like think of write a poem that's 50 lines long that has no punctuation or periods. Like the sentence never ends, for example, is one of them. I really like that one. That's the first one that came to mind. But, you know, push yourself. Don't, and I hate to use cliches, don't rest on your laurels. And don't put things like he was resting on his laurels in your poem, because your poem shouldn't be about saying something that's been said before. You should strive to create a new vision, because we're trying to progress as a culture. You shouldn't think you're the best welder ever, but you never had a mentor. You never there was never a protege, a mentorship type relationship involved in your training. Yeah, we're building society off of the backs of all of our ancestors who came before us. Don't cast them aside because your ego is so massive that you feel like you don't need to learn from anybody to already be the best version of yourself that you can be. That is, again, either just an example of a massively inflated ego or an insecure person that's reaching out to surround themselves with people who are going to give them positivity for just unrelated reasons, because that's just the nice thing to do. You know, I'm a lot of things, including nice, but I'm not nice just to be nice. If you impress me with your work, or if I see growth and development and an impressive level of skill, technical abilities, grammar is if there's grammar problems, then we're really going to get off on the wrong foot. I mean, fix that first, and then we can start going after, the perspective of what the reader sees. And you need to be the reader of your own poetry as well. You need to read it as if you were someone else for the first time, seeing it, and then think to yourself, like have that level of self-awareness to where you can perceive your work from other people's perspectives. Doesn't Bob Dylan have that great one? Like I wish that if only you could see how you look. What's that one? Like, and how does it feel? I wish you could step out of your shoes and look at yourself, and you know what it's like to be like. What was that line? I'm butchering it. This is what I do with Mark Twain as well. Like, but trust me, like that if you look up that line from that song, that's some people just don't have the ability to see themselves from the perspective of other people, and that leads to a very confused, frustrated place for them when they ultimately are not successful, because that's what they want. They want to be accepted. They want to be loved and cherished and recognized and remembered, and then they want to be able to prosper and gain appreciation and awards and be published and you want all that stuff, but you're not going to get it by pretending like you're amazing when you haven't done anything amazing yet. Hurts, doesn't it? Hurts. But, bite your lower lip and be like, I hate this. This brings me a great deal of pain, and I refuse to feel sorry for myself or be ashamed of my output, but at the same time think, but moving forward into tomorrow, the next day, and the next day, how can I outdo myself? How can I take the skills that I already have and build upon them to hone my craft and develop my vision and bring my inner voice out so that I set myself apart from everyone else with interesting themes and concepts and ideas and thought-provoking layers and layers that can be like write something that could be read. I've got poems. There's a few poems in Sound and Sense that I've read like 20 times, and I still tear up every time I read them because they're that profound. Let me tell you something. There's nothing you've done that brings a tear to my eye other than just like crying from just the insanity of you believing that you're at anywhere near that level to where you actually could like teach other people how to write. That would be just the worst thing ever, would be you trying to teach other people how to write that aren't like third graders. I mean, Jesus, I'm not saying that everything you've done is god awful. Nothing that you've done is terrible. It's just like, it's the kind of thing that a teacher would appraise and assess and give you feedback on. It's not the kind of thing that would validate you to be a teacher by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll take that one step further and put my money where my mouth is and say that I'm probably, despite being many levels beyond you in an understanding of the craft of this art form, the nuances, all the different devices and all the experience gained from just years and years and years of working with other poets, workshopping and studying with professors. Like, even all that doesn't qualify me to teach somebody how to express their poetry. And I truly feel that way because I don't think that I've really found my voice yet. So, and if I feel that way about myself, then you should definitely take a look in the mirror and say, is this really what I'm cut out for? Because truth be told, honestly, it's not. At this point, you've got a lot of learning to do. Young Padawan. Had to throw in a Star Wars reference. You've got a lot of work to do. You got a lot of homework. A lot of midnight oil needs to be burned before you get to the point where you're actually composing at a level that is, not just expert, not just advanced, but like elite, to even like learning the mastery to where you could actually theoretically just sit down because you have a certain feeling or because you saw something on the news and just sit down and write and just with no mistakes, perfect, it comes out. I'm not there. In fact, I really hope I never am because I just don't like it. Fundamentally, I don't like the idea of sitting down and composing something and saying, well, that's perfect. Like, that just doesn't sit well with me I better wrap this video up. We're almost in an hour. Just as like an ethos, doesn't sit well with me. It just, that kind of a philosophy is unappealing because I feel like through revision, you can always imbue your language with more meaning. Not to say that I haven't sat down and written poems that I felt were perfect and untouchable and never would change a word. That has happened too. Usually they're much shorter, however, but regardless, anything's possible, and everybody has a different way of expressing themselves creatively. So, but you should probably be your own biggest critic and especially not look to other people for validation, because that just, to me, kind of just screams it quietly screams insecurity. Tell me I'm great, darn it. I'm struggling right now. I want you to tell me how great I am. Well, if you need somebody to tell you how great you are, you're probably not that great. I'm sorry. If 1,000 people told me that my poems were trash, two things would happen. One, I wouldn't care because I know they're not. And two, I would want to know the reasons why. And like I said, especially working with my mom, an English teacher at the end of the day, high school, remedial, but still very passionate student of this language her whole life. She's given me criticisms and I've gone like, whoa, like I never thought of it that way. This is amazing. Like look what I could do, because I've had some of my works rejected by publications and it hurts me a lot. because I read some of the other works that are published in those same publications. I go, what do they have that I don't have? What am I missing here? And yeah, so it's a challenge. I mean, you're really setting yourself up for a life of misery and frustration unless you don't let it get to you. And if you're letting it get to you, then to bring it full circle, we need to work on that.